Our opponents are making the case that because of the American empire, or for the American empire, proxy wars are a means of great power competition, and that China and Russia have a history of supporting proxies in Vietnam, Ukraine, and Syria. They also are stating that most likely America will continue conflict through great power competition, China will deny access for the US to space, and foreign intervention makes conflict longer and challenges establishing rule of law. However, while our opposition claims that proxy wars are a means for GPC and go on to describe how U.S. influence has led to unstable situations, this claim that it is caused by GPC is actually not true. The United States' actions in Syria and Afghanistan are cited by our opponent were an attempt to combat terrorism as part of its strategy that the United States is now moving away from, as my partner stated, as a result of great power competition. Our opponents have also stated that anti-Asian hate has risen as a result of great power competition. However, this is also not true. Xenophobia has many causes and isn't necessarily linked to GPC. Warrant, Mineo 2021. Since the start of the pandemic, Asian Americans have become the target of xenophobic attacks. Much like Muslims were blamed and scapegoated after the 9/11 attacks, the pandemic also exacerbated social inequalities as Asian Americans, many of them immigrants, work in the underground economy, can't access unemployment benefits, lack health insurance, and may be subjected to police harassment. This pandemic has affected the most vulnerable of the vulnerable, says Shaw, the lead researcher for the project. When we talk about anti-Asian racism, it's not within a vacuum. It's within the context of these broader structures: race, gender, immigration status, socioeconomic condition, all of that impacts people. Negative press coverage of the Chinese government also has more to do with China not following the rules-based international order and not because of great power competition. In either case, China is still condemned by the international community for its human rights abuses. The country has also, furthermore, blatantly disregarded its own commitments in Hong Kong and repeatedly threatened military action in Taiwan, holding the lives of almost 24 million Taiwanese nationals in a limbo in an effort to project strength. I would also encourage our judges to consider the alternative to negative media coverage condemning Chinese actions, which is either tacit support or toleration, running contrary to the ideals of the United States and the global world. I would like to conclude that Washington is not responsible for the actions of Beijing or the American press, and the fear of Chinese government or Chinese communism does not necessarily translate into a direct fear or hatred of Chinese people. Our opponents have also stated that we are fighting a proxy war in the South China Sea, and this is not true. We are not fighting a proxy war in the South China Sea, merely condemning Chinese actions such as land reclamation, which, while it has to do with the military, is not a war. They have also stated that China is not unique in its human rights violations, but they themselves agree that China is now rising as a threat and thus the main proponent of human rights violations along with its ally North Korea. Thus, it is no longer a wonder that U.S. media focuses on them in its scale, not simply because the United States sees China as a threat to its hegemony. China violates the rules-based international order, which has brought benefits for everyone in the world, reining in the actions of authoritarian governments and human rights violations like in Yugoslavia. China is unique in its scale and its violations. They said that China is in fact rising in its power, and its scale is what matters and the reason why the United States media actually focuses on these things. Many links that our opponents attempt to draw are generalized and neglect the nuances of the situation. Claiming that anti-Asian hate is purely a response to the United States strategy ignores many of the different causes of the phenomenon, which cannot, as our opponents believe, simply be drawn to a single policy or strategy, especially when it is something that has existed long before the strategy was actually adopted. Furthermore, their claim that China is not unique in its human rights violations is contradicted by themselves because they agree that China is now a rising threat and thus the main proponent of human rights violations. It is no wonder that they are focused on in scale. And lastly, our opponents are ultimately reliant on the strength of their numbers and do not connect their points to the actual resolution, while our points pair an active example in the status quo to show pivots in U.S. action that are directly being generated as a result of great power competition, which is what is in the scope of this resolution and exactly what it demands, such as combating climate change. And we give a real example to that as an effect, such as through the IRA. Therefore, I urge the judge to cast an affirmative ballot. Thank you.